All right, perfect. So starting with brief introductions. Hi, I'm Dina. You'll be getting a lot of emails from me. I'm the editorial board experience manager here at PLOS. I'm on a team that's dedicated entirely to supporting academic editors and section editors on all of our journals' editorial boards. So my role in particular is providing resourcing and training and onboarding for people who have joined the board recently. And my background is in wildlife biology. I did a master's in parasitology in wild birds. And Jenny, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thanks, Dina. Yeah, I'm Jenny. I'm one of the staff editors here at PLOS, particularly based in the public health and medicine team in PLOS 1. So I have a background in Parkinson's and medical neuroscience research and a little bit of cancer research as well. But I'm in the editorial team at PLOS, so we handle in-house editorial tasks and also offer support to you as academic editors. And we have a little bit of oversight of how manuscripts are being handled and help with any queries that you might have.
Thank you, Jenny. And I've got a pre-built poll in here for you to answer with those questions that you see on screen. So if you can just answer what board you're on, where you're calling in from, and I'll give you a few moments to fill that out, and then I'll read them out afterwards. Seems like we're at critical mass there. And pull. Here we go. All right. Oh, perfect. Everybody's calling in from PLOS One. That actually makes it a little bit more straightforward because we can unify all of the resources together. Welcome. We've got a nice spread of expertise and age in the field here, editorial board membership, and people calling in from Asia and Europe. Interesting, there's no North America given the time zone. Maybe it's a little early. I myself am here in San Francisco, so the sun isn't up yet. All right, perfect. Let's move along. Cool. All right. So a little bit of an intro to the editorial boards. You'll see me clicking in and out of this presentation here because the whole point of this, there's a lot of information that we're going to be sharing over the next 30 minutes. And it's not to have you memorize it. I promise there will not be a quiz at the end, but it's really to give you a visual of what these resources look like so that you can access them at a later date. So starting with the editorial boards, I've opened up the board website here for PLOS One. If you ever want to see who else is on the board with you, you can go to this page. It syncs daily with Editorial Manager, which is our submission system platform. And so you can search any members of the editorial board. You can look for their name if you know someone in particular, geographic location, or if you want to see other editors that are in your same subject area, you can search by subject section here or classification, which are the very specific terms listed in their profile. The board is made up of section editors and academic editors. Section editors have more of an oversight or informing on policy strategy, also recommending academic editors to the board. And then academic editors yourselves are chiefly responsible for overseeing the peer review process at PLOS One. So these next couple of slides, I'm going to go over kind of quickly because you will have seen them in part of the onboarding process. So the role itself is, in short, handling papers from the beginning, from when you receive an invitation, all the way through to the final decision, either accept or reject, and then securing reviewers and communicating out those decisions to authors. The next slide here is our code of conduct for editorial board members. We have a very robust publication ethics program here at PLOS, which I feel sets us apart from some other journals. So this is definitely something that we uphold and we expect all of our editorial board members to uphold as well. Perfect. So getting into the nitty gritty here, editorial manager is our submission system that we use and where you'll be doing all of your academic editor work. It can be let's put this nicely, an archaic system. I've heard legacy is probably the nicest way I've heard of it described. It is a very basic system, but that also means that it's pretty easy to figure out because it does very limited things. But some key things that I really wanted to point out to you, in addition to the details of handling papers, are these profile management features that you have in Editorial Manager. So you'll find all of the screenshots to Editorial Manager here. This applies to PLOS One and all of the other journals. So on this getting started and the updating your areas of expertise page, it's a little bit not intuitive, but once you log into Editorial Manager and you click on your name in the top right corner, there's a drop down that'll show up where you can switch between roles. If you are an author at PLOS One, you'll find that here. And then right at the bottom, you'll see Update My Information. And on this page is your basic profile information. So if you change your contact information, like you move to another university or something like that, you'll update your contact info there. If you need to change any of your terms, that's all going to be found there as well, specifying your classifications. And then keywords are free text, anything that's not covered by the PLOS taxonomy. And then another feature that is a little bit buried that I definitely want to make sure you're aware of is this ability to set unavailable dates. So this is really important if you're going to be out in the field or you have a particularly busy semester or something like that teaching, you can set yourself as unavailable during those times and you will not receive new invitations to handle manuscripts. If you're currently handling manuscripts, it's particularly helpful for us if you can say, I'm really busy, I'm going to be away, but I can complete the current papers that I have. That will show up there. So it's definitely something I wanted you to be aware of. Okay. Getting into the actual peer review process. This is the general life of a PLOS One manuscript that comes in. A couple of things that I wanted to point out on this chart is that we do a series of technical checks. So if you receive a paper, by the time it gets to you as an invitation to handle a manuscript, the journal office has already looked at it for a variety of things. So we do an initial technical check, like did the authors upload their PDF properly? And then we also do what we call subscan, which is short for submission scanning. And Jenny will go into this a little bit later. But that's where we actually do an editorial check as well to make sure that is this paper in scope for the journal? Did the authors comply with our policies on publication ethics or data availability? Those kinds of checks are done at that stage. And then you'll see here, then it comes to you for invitation. So just know that every paper by the time it gets to you has been looked at by the journal from a variety of different lenses. And then we'll get into the details of all of these different steps here. But very basically, once you agree to handle a manuscript, you can issue a desk reject at that point and not send it out for peer review. And then if you go this way, that's kind of our standard, sending it out for reviews, assessing those reviews, and then again, issuing that final decision, which is this yellow color here. All right, getting into the first of our, what I call the core quick guide. So there's 4 of these, and they're meant to be a guide anytime that you have a fork in the road decision to make. So the very first one is when there is an invitation to handle a manuscript in your inbox, and you are deciding, do I agree to handle this or not? We have a guide for that. So clicking out into this guide, again, not meant to be an all exhaustive memorization exercise for you, but just showing you what it looks like. So invitations will come into your inbox and they have a standard formatting, which varies a little bit depending on what type of manuscript article it is or whether we want to call your attention to anything in particular in that manuscript. But in general, you'll be able to see them in your inbox because it'll say PLOS One really big. And then there's going to be key information about the manuscript in that actual email. So you'll see the title of the article, the authors, so you can determine if you have a conflicting interest or not, and then the abstract as well. So you can kind of get the gist of what the article is about. And then you can interact with the invitation from your email inbox as well, whether you would like to agree to handle that manuscript or decline. Another thing I'd like to point out too is if you don't feel like you have enough information within that email itself to make a decision, you can actually click into EM right here, log into your new invitations folder. That'll take you to Editorial Manager, where you can also interact with the invitation, agree or decline, but you can also download the full submission to look over the full article and decide whether it really is something that is in your area of expertise or not. This page here is a little bit of information about how manuscripts are sent to you. This is a part where I do want to call out that because we use an algorithm, it is likely that not all invitations to handle manuscripts are going to be squarely within your area of expertise. It's a robot, it's kind of imperfect, but also know that because it's a robot, you're not going to hurt anyone's feelings if you decline a manuscript. So if a paper comes to you, please don't feel pressured to take it. You have the choice always to agree or decline to handle that manuscript. So there's a little bit more information here about how that works. And then moving on here to the very helpful table, which is a guide to helping you decide whether to handle that manuscript or not. So we have the overview of the peer review timeline here to help you determine, okay, do I have enough time in my schedule to handle this paper all the way through? Um, and then here are the things that you would want to consider. Okay, you have the time to handle this submission. It's in your area of expertise. Caveat here that, again, because it's an algorithm, you might get said things that are kind of on the fringes of your expertise. And it's up to you to make that determination as to whether you feel comfortable enough identifying suitable reviewers and assessing the revisions that the authors make, whether you would like to handle that paper or not. You have no competing interests, and this here is a link out to speak to what that means for PLOS, so you can make that determination. And then this one's a little bit interesting too. It's not suitable for peer review. So double star here is that if it's in your area of expertise, but the paper still isn't really that good, you can pick up that paper and issue a reject decision if you feel that it's not worthy of publication or that the authors would have to make substantial revisions. So things for you to consider there. And then declining is basically the opposite of all of those things. Let's see, going in here too. So these are some frequently asked questions about invitations. Notably, I would like to call out that the invitations say, like, please react to this invitation within 24 hours. We do need to keep the manuscript publication process moving along, but your email is not going to explode if you don't respond to it within 24 hours. It's basically like as soon as you can get to it would be really helpful for us. Another thing I'd like to point out too is that PLOS Match sometimes goes what I call Terminator on certain people. It kind of fixes its glowy eyes and it sends far too many invitations than one could possibly handle, sometimes upwards of 5 a day. If you are experiencing that, please write to my team, edboardsupport@plos.org. There are filters that we can adjust in your profile that will calm the Terminator down. Perfect. Okay. So going into a little bit more detail here about the peer review timeline. So this is an idealized timeline. Every manuscript is a little bit different, but just to give you a sense of how to set your expectations on how much time you would be spending on a manuscript. Let's say you agree to handle a paper. It's in your area of expertise. It meets all of those qualifications in the table we just looked at. That's day 0. So then within 3 days, look at the submission, read through it in full, and decide, okay, should this paper be sent out for peer review or not? That's where you can issue the reject decision prior to sending it out for peer review. You do not need to secure reviewers to issue a reject decision at this stage. But let's say you do send it out for peer review. So then you're going to spend 1 to 2 weeks finding and securing reviewers. And Jenny's going to go into details about the types of tools and support and advice we have for that particular process, aiming for 2 reviewers. And then this time you have 2 to 3 weeks. This is when the reviewers are writing up their review of the manuscript and they're starting to send it back. And then once all of the reviews are in, another 3 days to reread through the paper, familiarize yourself with it again, take a look at what the reviewers said, and then write up your decision letter to the authors. Let's say you issue a revised decision, that's going to send it back. The authors will revise, and then once they resubmit, this cycle starts over again if you decide that you do want to send it to the reviewers to take a look at once more. All right, and I'm going to stop sharing, and Jenny's going to take over from here and go into the next stages of the peer review process.
Thanks, Dina. Let's just pull the slides up for everyone. Great. So hopefully everyone can now see these slides as well. And yeah, as Dina said, I'll take you a little bit more through what we expect in peer review and kind of what your role entails when you're handling a manuscript. So when you first have the manuscript assigned, you have this initial evaluation stage. And as Dina's already mentioned, we will have done checks and has checked ethics are in place, that it's suitable, that the scope is correct, that it's the correct article type as well. Sometimes we'll get clinical trials submitted as research articles or vice versa. So we do all of those early checks and make sure that the manuscript that's coming to you meets our minimum requirements for consideration in the journal. And then we're relying on you with your expertise and with our publication criteria to consider whether it's suitable to send out for peer review and whether it's something we should be considering for publication. So this can sometimes get a bit confusing. I know different journals have very different criteria. And the nice thing at PLOS is that our publication criteria are very much the same across PLOS 1, but also our other journals should you edit for them in the future. One of the common misinterpretations that we do see because of the criteria in other journals is that we do not reject for novelty. So if a study is redundant or it's very closely just copying what someone else has done, you might consider it not suitable. But if it's validating previous findings and building upon that, that is something that we would send for review. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking work. We also do not reject for English language concerns as long as it is readable and understandable. Obviously, if you think we've missed something on our language checks and you're really struggling to understand it, please do flag that to us. But in general, we don't reject for either of these reasons. And sometimes we might have added some notes when we perform these initial submission scans. So these will be at the top of your confirmation email or in the details page in the manuscript. And this can be related to the type of paper, the type of study. For example, for clinical trials, we provide a little bit more guidance and support, and we're able to help recruit statistical reviewers. But there are a number of different reasons, and sometimes it can just be the subject matter is a little bit sensitive or needs some additional consideration. So all of that will be in the confirmation in details pages. You are ultimately the subject areas, you have this expertise, and we really want you to consider how our publication criteria are applicable in your field and what is normal. Is the reporting to the standard that you would expect in the papers you're reading? Is the level of detail sufficient for reproducibility? Is there something kind of that could be, obviously, if it's something that could be addressed by revisions, then sending it out for review is a great consideration. But if it's a fundamental flaw in the manuscript, or you think that it's not something that could be addressed, then those are instances where you might choose to desk reject. And that's kind of where you meet that first fork, where you would either send it out for peer review and recruit reviewers to handle it, or you would issue a desk rejection. And one of the only pieces of advice I'd offer here is that if you issue a rejection, please make sure you add notes to the rejection letter to clearly explain to the authors why it's being rejected at this stage. Because if the authors don't understand why it's been rejected, then they're much more likely to appeal it, and those appeals will come back to you as the editor. So if there's a fundamental issue with the study or with the reporting that needs, major rewriting before you consider that manuscript, make that clear in your decision letter, because it really helps the authors to understand why it's been rejected at that stage. If you decide to send it out for peer review, we will get to those steps in a minute, but please note that all accepted manuscripts must receive at least one review. So you're not able to accept it at this stage because you need at least one external reviewer. And we do have some guidance for this initial evaluation. Apologies, the Zoom bar is hiding everything that I'm trying to share. So we have this quick guide for initial evaluation, which again will mean that this isn't an exercise in remembering everything you're being told today. And this is a great reference document. So it lists our publication criteria, in which we expect the study to present the results of original research, that they've not been published elsewhere. If it's a preprint, that's absolutely fine. If it's a conference abstract, that's also okay. But we do not publish anything that's already been peer reviewed and published elsewhere. We expect everything to have been performed to high technical standards and sufficiently described. So if you're rejecting, it's really great in your decision letter if you can link your rejection to one of these criteria as well, because that helps the authors to understand. And there is, as we said, always the possibility of additional information for you in that confirmation. So it's really worth checking, because these notes are there to support you and also mean that if you have any initial queries about those comments which you'd like an answer to before you decide how to proceed, you can reach out to us and we can help support. There is also support here for when it's suitable to reject without review. So this is really good if you're looking at a paper and you're not sure whether to send it for review, or if it feels a little bit borderline. If it meets one of these criteria here, then you could reject without sending it out for review first. And again, there are some FAQs at the bottom that can be helpful to refer to. If from here you decide to send the manuscript out for peer review, you would then find reviewers for this paper. And that is the step that can be really challenging. I know that finding reviewers for manuscripts can be a frustrating point for some of our editors, and we've put together as much help and support for you as possible to make it as easy as possible to find reviewers with the right expertise to handle that manuscript. So from our perspective, we want to see suitable reviewers with expertise in the subject matter and the methodology. They should ideally be actively publishing in that area, and they need to be unbiased. So they cannot be, researchers with clear conflicts of interest, or co-authors with the authors of this paper. So as Tina's already mentioned, there is a link to more specific information about our conflict of interest policy, which you're welcome to check as well. There are quite a few different tips and tricks that you can use when you're finding reviewers. And again, we have this quick guide, which is really helpful. But the invitations for reviewers are all managed through the editorial manager system. So you can send reviewers, you can see who you've previously invited. And if you're assigned a manuscript that's already partway through the peer review process, say it's had one revision and that academic editor is no longer able to handle it, you can actually just go in and invite the previous reviewers as well, because it will pull those through for you. We generally suggest that you need to invite around 8 to 10 reviewers to secure one reviewer for a manuscript. And editorial manager allows you to set alternates for your actions. So this means that you can identify reviewers, send invitations to one group, and set a second group as alternates, which, as you maybe get declines from that first group, will then get sent out. So that can help kind of manage that workload. This quick guide has a lot of information again about this whole process, and it's here to really support you. So it has a checklist of suggested qualifications, expertise, and also checks to ensure there's no conflict of interest with the reviewers that you're inviting to handle the manuscript. And obviously, if you invite a reviewer, they can declare if they feel that they have a conflict of interest. And then with our assistance, you can always determine whether this should prohibit them from handling it or not, if they're willing to handle it. Because again, different publishers and different journals have different requirements around this. There are some really clear tips here, which really do make a difference when you're looking to find reviewers. Inviting researchers you know is always a really good start. Obviously, you're handling this manuscript because you have expertise in this area. So it stands to reason that your colleagues, your contacts, and your collaborators will also have that relevant expertise, and they may be familiar with the work relevant to the paper, and if they've got the time, willing to act as reviewers. Obviously, be mindful of competing interests, and be mindful of not always inviting the same reviewers to handle every manuscript, because although it's in your area of expertise, it may sometimes not be in everyone, sort of in your close circle's expertise. it's also just good to diversify who you're inviting as well. Researchers whose work you know, if you're reading papers from specific research groups, it may be that those researchers are relevant to the papers you're reviewing and you're able to invite them. And you can also do broader searches. There is a reviewer locator tool that you can use, which uses Web of Science to help you find reviewers. You can also use databases like Google Scholar and PubMed to find articles similar, and you can invite the authors of those. And there may also be, relevant researchers in the reference list, but just again, be mindful of those competing interests and that risk. There are some additional tips here, and certainly personalizing the invitation can help secure reviewers. If you've invited someone because you've seen that they've published in a very similar area, adding that personal touch to your invitation email might make the difference between them accepting it or just declining it, because I know that as researchers, everyone gets a lot of these invitations, and there is some guidance here as well for how to actually invite reviewers through the editorial manager system. And again, some frequently asked questions that you can always refer back to. Once you have invited your reviewers, you've got their assessments of the manuscript, and you're deciding what to do with it next. We again have guides to support you for this step. The reviews come back in a structured form, and typically there's a box which will have a lot of the reviewer comments in it, but you may have differing views and different recommendations from the reviewers. We request that there's at least a minimum of one reviewer on each manuscript, but in general, having 2 reviewers is really good, because it can help you get a really balanced view of the manuscript and how to proceed with it. In some instances, we'll see more than 2 reviewers, but we ideally don't want to have too many different reviews, because that can make it really tricky for the authors to know what comments they should address and prioritize as they're making their amendments, because sometimes reviewers will express conflicting suggestions. If you have really brief or kind of general reviews, these aren't particularly good quality, and those instances where if you've got 2 reviews and one of them is really general and not particularly helpful to the authors, you might want to invite an additional reviewer. But please note that you should never alter, delete, or edit reviews at all. So even if there is a brief review, when you issue a decision, you can recommend that authors pay more attention to reviews from reviewers 2 and 3, perhaps, but we would still include that review from the first reviewer. You also have the ability to act as the interpreter for these reviewer comments. So if you feel some of the suggestions are unreasonable, or you disagree, and perhaps you feel that a review has not fully understood the author's, if they've made a comment about the rationale not being clear and you don't agree with that, you can add those comments to the decision letter as well. So as an academic editor, although you're not reviewing your manuscript, you can add your own comments to help the authors improve it if you issue a revised decision. And obviously, you can always reach out to us if you have any publication ethics concerns, particularly around citation manipulation. So if your reviewers are suggesting that authors cite a lot of their own papers, this is quite a concerning behaviour. And you can let us know so that we can keep an eye on that reviewer, but you can also add a comment to the authors that it's not necessary to include all of those citations, and they should always be suggested to consider them, but understand that they're not mandatory inclusions. There are 4 available decisions when you reach this step of the peer review process, so you can reject at this stage if you've got reject recommendations, or if you've got major revision recommendations and you feel that these are too great to handle in a short revision process, you could issue a rejection at that stage. There are then 2 forms of revised decision, major and minor revision. And ultimately, this just relates to how great the changes are that are suggested. I think particularly at first revision, if there are extensive comments, a major revision is great, because it means the authors know before they even look at those reports that there may be extensive changes that are being requested. And then obviously you can also accept the manuscript. If you have reviewers recommending 2 different paths, consider your view of the manuscript, consider your view of the reviewer's comments, and then issue a decision accordingly. And in these cases, we just suggest adding a note to your decision letter, which addresses the fact that there are two different recommendations. So if one author recommends a rejection, one reviewer recommends a rejection and one recommends a revision, and you decide to send it for revision, you could make a comment in the decision letter that addresses that and says that although reviewer one recommended rejection, you feel that the manuscript could be sufficiently improved with revision, in line with both reviewers' comments. Because ultimately your decision letter should provide clear context for the authors in your decision and also set out what is expected if they're submitting a revised manuscript in the future. So try to be clear, be specific, and also be constructive. You know, if we're asking for improvements in a manuscript, that doesn't mean the initial manuscript is bad. It just means that we want to make it better before we publish it. And again, we have some quick guides available to help support with this process. So we have guidance around making and issuing decisions. This gives some suggestions on handling sort of vague, unfocused, or conflicting reviews and how you might want to address those. And then this table is really helpful for actually making your decision. So it lets you know what decision should be made kind of based on the reviewer's comments and how that impacts the manuscript, and then actually what the following process is. So for both major and minor revisions, the authors have 45 days to resubmit, and then you would be re-invited as their academic editor to handle the resubmission, or if you accept or reject. Manuscripts that have already gone through one round of revision do not necessarily need to be sent back to the reviewers. If the reviewers recommended major revisions, it's often really helpful to send it back to them so they can assess whether the authors have suitably addressed their comments, but you can issue a decision on the manuscript as long as it has previously been seen by reviewers. So you've got at least that review input in the first stage. And then again, the decision letter, this just gives some guidance. And you'll see this format in the decision letter. This is for you to remove and add your comments here. So it just helps delineate a suitable space in the decision letter template for you to add your own comments. And we also have some resources regarding publication ethics concerns, because as academic editors, you see the review process and you look into these manuscripts and you might see something in this process of the handling of manuscripts which is concerning to you, or because you may also edit for other journals or review for other journals, you might notice that this is similar to something you've seen elsewhere and have concerns around that. So this document goes through what our responsibilities are with regards to publication ethics, and as Tina mentioned, we set very high standards for the research ethics and integrity of our publications. It gives you some context around what your responsibilities are and what actions to take if you encounter a potential problem. Because in general, that action will involve contacting us and we will look into it further. But we really appreciate that you are able to have this input and to flag these issues that we might not otherwise see. I, with that, will stop sharing and pass back to Dina. But if you have any questions related to that, please do pop your questions in the chat and I'm happy to respond.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And actually, Joanna has a question that would be best answered by you in the question and answer session. So you can get to that while I take back over here. All right. We are. Okay, perfect. So that kind of covered the bulk of our resources for editors. And there were a couple of questions in the chat about whether the slides would be shared in the recording. Absolutely. I'll be sending out the recording this week along with these slides and then all of the links to the resources that we covered today. And then I do want to just kind of wrap everything up and show you that everything that we covered today is available right now on our resources for editors page. They look very similar depending on which journal you're on, with slightly different colors of the web pages, but just to give give you a visual of what this looks like. This is the PLOS One version here, and the side navigation bar will help you navigate to the relevant portion of the peer review process where you can find those quick guides that we've covered today. So for example, maybe you're ready to issue a decision, the one that Jenny just covered, and you can click on this and it will take you to that guide with all of our recommendations there. We've also included other helpful links that would be relevant at that stage. So, okay, maybe you need to consult the publication criteria again, or, oh, I think the authors might have used AI. What was the policy again? You can click on that here. And then all of the other resources that we covered today should all be found here. But in case you still have additional questions, I've listed out all of the journal contacts here. So if you have a question about a particular manuscript that you're handling at the moment, the journal office is the best place. That's kind of a one-stop shop, and then your email will then get routed to the appropriate person. So if it's something that the journal administrative office can answer, they will help with that. But if it's a question about an editorial decision, they might escalate that up to a member of our editorial support staff as well. So that's a great email to contact if you're handling a particular manuscript. If you have a question about your role more broadly, or you're experiencing something like receiving too many invitations to handle manuscripts, or other questions about your role, or eventually you need to resign, edboardsupport@plos.org, that will get routed to my team. And like I mentioned, we're a team that's solely dedicated to supporting editorial board members. So that's the best contact there. Perfect. And with that, I'm going to lead us into the question and answer session. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And let me just review the chat really quickly. Okay, it looks like everything is good there. Please feel free to come off mute at this time or raise your hand if you'd like to ask any questions. Okay, Amal says, can all questions and answers be shared via email? Yes, absolutely. I can share everything out. There's been a lot of good questions in the chat. I think I'll export the chat and include that in the summary email as well, so that all of those questions are captured. Did anyone have any other questions? Bhaskar, you came off mute. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I've just completed a couple of, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Completed a couple of them. One thing I noticed is that when we receive the reviewer comments back and making a decision, a couple of them they sent as PDF files with detailed comments. And then when I was making the, going through the decision letter, and there were two copies. One said the original, and the other one sanitized copy. So this is the reviewer comments. And I noticed that the sanitized copy doesn't get automatically included in the decision letter. I had to download it and then attach it. So I was a bit confused and I didn't know whom to contact. So, but I figured out in the end, it was not, not too complicated. But my question is, I thought in my first review that any PDF attachments sent by the reviewers will be added to the decision letter automatically, but it didn't.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Jenny, do you know if a reviewer submits comments via a Word doc or a PDF, is that available to the authors from their view?
I would assume so. All of the reviewer comments that they put in the form are directly included at the bottom of the decision letter. But if they include additional comments as a Word document or a PDF, this should be included. If it's not, then this is obviously really problematic. But I've not had any instances where a reviewer says, please see my document for comments, and an author hadn't been able to access it. It may just be in the view that you see before it's sent. It doesn't show it, but it should be included as an attachment automatically when it is sent out.
Okay, and that will be the sanitized copy, not the one with,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and the journal office should be able to help with that too. They're very skilled at EM navigation.
Yeah. If you have any instances where you're not sure that it has been included, or if an author comes back to you and says, your decision letter says there are comments, I can't see the comments, please just email us and then we can look into it, and we can always share those comments separately if for some reason there's been a glitch in the system.
Okay, a couple other questions came in chat. Can all questions that already answered that one? I'm
I have one question which is not answered.
okay, sure.
Maybe let me explain that. So I'm trying to explain this both from author and editor perspective. So my experience actually. Sometimes you get a paper to administer in terms of that has been assigned with another academic editor, and it says it's not available. And would you be something, a question? But when you see the history behind this paper, sometimes it takes more than 1 year, coming back to you. This is one issue. And as an author, also I have like 2-3 years ago that a paper was submitted with +1 and have been following constantly. And after 2 years, I got a paper back saying that academic editor is no more available. So both from, being an editor as well as an author, it feels that this kind of experience is a bit problematic. And what are the problem causing for unavailability of academic editors in more general?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. So you're speaking to what we refer to as reassignments. And
Yeah.
there's a variety of reasons that papers will go into reassignment. And so this is why in this webinar in particular, we're trying to emphasize upfront that you should only take on papers that you are fully available to handle or that are in your area of expertise. So one common one I'll see is an editor saw an invitation in their inbox and they said, okay, yeah, I think that's in my area. I agree. And then they download the full submission and they go, oh no, this is actually not in my area of expertise. And then they'll email the journal office and say, I can't actually take this paper. And boom, that's a reassignment. Or they'll take on a paper and then immediately go on vacation. And then they can no longer handle the paper all the way through. That's a reassignment as well. Sometimes papers will go into a reassignment because someone will take on the paper and, they kind of know based on their expertise that this paper really isn't all that good, but maybe they really want it to work. And so they try to secure reviewers and it turns out really hard because everybody knows that this paper probably really isn't that good. And so that can be a situation where a paper sits for a very long time. And then eventually someone says, okay, well, it's just been too hard to secure reviewers. I don't want to handle this paper anymore. And that's a reassignment. Sometimes things just fall through the cracks, unfortunately. So reassignments happen for a whole variety of reasons, which is why we really try to emphasize, like I said, on the upfront, let's try to create the conditions that would avoid that particular situation. As to your paper, I'm happy to look into the specifics of what happened. If you want to send me a direct message with the manuscript number, I can certainly look into that. Yeah. Did that answer your
Yeah,
question?
I can send you. I mean,
Mhm,
sometimes from, author perspective, it is frustrating to get a manuscript after 2 years.
mhm,
Being, in the process, you expect for some revision comments or some rejection with comments, but
mhm,
then you just get a message that we couldn't secure this and that, and then it's being rejected. I also recently accepted, a paper of reassignment because that experience was for me is a big thing. If I
mhm.
say no, it will go to the same issue after like 1 year or, like 18 months in the process that no one is taking this. So there should be a way to handle it instead of, getting back to the reviewer after we sit with it for more than a year. I mean, the whole process should be to find, at least a comment for the reviewer for keeping it for a year rather than sending back, a rejection is also okay with comments,
Right, right.
So
I might be able to offer a little bit of reassurance here as well from the editorial side. So in cases where a manuscript is been reassigned and say it's had 2 or 3 editors and it gets a bit stuck, or if an editor's struggled to find reviewers and they've kind of given it back to us, as staff editors, we are associate editors and we do step in and edit these manuscripts as well to try and help them getting stuck. As Dina said, there are a few that fall through the cracks, and I have when I see these, I do flag them because I feel so bad for authors when I see a manuscript has been with us for more than, say, 4 months or 6 months, and we've not issued that first decision on it yet, but we do have steps in process. And for those manuscripts where we've sent lots of reviewer invitations and we can't get reviewers, we don't reject them, but we do have steps in process where we might have to withdraw those so that the authors have that opportunity to go and submit elsewhere as well. But I really appreciate your comments because I know from when I've authored papers how frustrating it is when you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for a decision to come back. And I really appreciate you accepting that reassignment as well, because those that don't go through reassignment eventually end up with us. And as staff editors, we are always handling a lot of manuscripts. So it really helps when someone with the right expertise is handling them, instead of us where we're in the right teams, but we don't always match them as well as you would. Joanna, I'm sorry, the cat has left me, but if she comes back, I promise I'll show you the whole cat. I'm glad she's come to learn about being an editor as well.
Yeah, and then last thing to follow up from the editorial side of accepting an invitation to handle a reassignment, we do have a guide for that also available on the resources for editors page. If you use Control F, or you can navigate on the sidebar and search for reassignments, there's a whole guide about how to orient, how to figure out what's happened before, because these things kind of do happen in the peer review process. Let's see, there was a question from Fan May here. Before the manuscript comes to an editor, will the journal have screened it for AI use and plagiarism? Is there a report about the result? We do scan for plagiarism. We use Authenticate as our check. I believe it's available upon request to editors. AI usage is a little bit trickier. That one we don't have a detection tool that we use right now, though our editorial team is on the lookout for that. And I've linked in our chat here, and I'll send it out in the follow-up as well. We do have a policy on AI use for both authors and for academic editors and reviewers using it in peer review. In short, cleaning up grammar is okay. Uploading a full submission to an AI tool and saying, write this review for me, is not okay. And then all use of AI must be declared in some form. So either if you're going to be using it in your decision letter, saying I used artificial intelligence to clean up grammar, just a very quick sentence here. And then authors must declare their use for it as well. If you ever have any questions about that, like I mentioned, we have a whole publication ethics team. So I'll put the email in the chat. It's pub-ethics@plos.org.
And if you ever have a manuscript assigned to you and you have concerns that AI has been used to write it, or to generate images, and that authors have not declared it AI use, you can also email us and flag that as well. Because although we don't have a tool to kind of screen them at submission yet, it's something that we take really, really seriously, and we can look into for particular manuscripts if there's kind of cause and concern to do so.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So I'm going to bring us back to the slides really quickly and just kind of wrap everything up here. Okay, like I mentioned, I'll be sharing all of this out later on with all of the links. We did the Q&A. So kind of in summary, reach out to us at any time. We've mentioned a variety of different teams that we have here at PLOS that are here to support you. We've got the journal team, we've got my editorial board services team, and then we have our publication ethics team too. We've shared the contacts for all of those. So please, if you have any questions at all, each manuscript is unique. If you have questions, please do reach out to us. We're here to support you. You can engage with us on social media. We have recently migrated from X over to Blue Sky. PLOS Water isn't quite there yet, but I've included all of the links here so you can engage with any of the journals that you're affiliated with or PLOS.org, our larger organization. And then you are, of course, an ambassador for both the journal and for our organization. So please do go forth and sing the praises of this wonderful open access, transparency, and science mission-driven organization that we are all a part of. Perfect. And with that, I'm just going to close us out here and stop the recording. Stop recording.